Hello and welcome. My name is Fred Mensick. In the graphs and some of the charts there are going to be definitions. Please don't hesitate to refer to these as we move forward. Important considerations in this presentation are, the first one, in-river fish or bypass fish are prey for a variety of predators. The survival rate for in-river or bypass fish averages 49.8% to 53.1% only from Lower Granite to Bonneville Dam. I really want to emphasize that. That's in-river only from Lower Granite to Bonneville. Second, the court order spill began on June 30th, 2005. This is a couple of charts referring to that 50% mortality rate. Graph one on the left is wild steelhead. Graph on the right is wild chinook. The bottom line on both of these is the in-river component that has a 50% mortality rate just to Bonneville Dam. These fish have not been to the ocean and have not been exposed to the ocean fishery. Conversely, the blue line are fish that were transported. They went down to the estuary, were released, were exposed to the ocean fishery, survived, came back up the Columbia, up the Snake River, and returned to the Lower Granite Dam adult fish ladder. Fish go to the ocean and return 1, 2, 3, or 4 years later. Many of the graphs represent fish life history by being offset by 1 to 4 years in the data set. The following slides show this representation of fish life history. So we're going to move from the top left graph, then the top right, bottom left, bottom right. And what you're going to see is the adult returns here is in blue, and we're going to move that back so that it lines up with the year that they were transported or barged. So here is the first slide we were looking at, and now we're going to move that back 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years. This is now lined up with the year that they were transported. We're going to look at this graph later on in the presentation. Fish travel downstream with the water. If water is spilled, fish are spilled and are called in-river migrants. In-river fish are a result of either spill, screen from the turbines and bypass below the dam, or pass through the turbines. In this report, spilled fish and bypassed fish are synonymous with in-river fish. Fish are either bypassed or transported. The bypass numbers come from Fish Passage Center. Unfortunately, there's a significant discrepancy in Fish Passage Center's bypass numbers for 2020 to 2023. Approximately 12 million smolts reach Lower Granite Dam every migration season, with 3 million fish or less transported during the 2020 to 23 migration seasons. There should be an estimated 3 million or more fish bypassed. Yet, Fish Passage Center's bypass numbers are less than 400 for each of those years. So what we're seeing here is that when spill increases, we see increase in the number of fish bypassed. Particularly on a high spill year, those fish are spilled. This is the discrepancy issue. Why suddenly do we have less than 400,000 fish bypass each one of these years when we know we're spilling water? So the average bypass number between 2005 and 19 is 1,814,000 fish. So I plugged those into the data set so that it represents the average between here and 2019. And what that does is it brings that trend line up, which is almost parallel with the spill trend line. Graphs 4, 5, and 6 show the impact of spill on adult returns. There's a significant increase in barge numbers in 2005, reflected in an increase in Chinook returns in 2009. Chinook numbers in 2014 and 15 increased partially due to a decrease in the Alaska fishery bycatch. In this graph, 2005 is when a spill was initiated. Note that there was no spill back here, and yet returns were significantly high. In 2005, we barged 12 million smolts. 4 years later, we had a wonderful return for Chinooks. However, you'll note that the Chinook return line trend line is really quite flat. So we're not seeing spill as it increases, make a significant increase in adult Chinook returns. In fact, when we spill a lot, we don't get good returns. Steelhead show a significant problem when it comes to spill. As spill increases, Chinook steelhead returns decrease. Now when we add the steelhead and the Chinook together, there's a real obvious decrease in adult returns as spill increases. The turbulence of waters spilled for fish passage damages smolts in an attempt to flush fish downriver. Remember, these are run-of-river dams. Whatever comes to the dam is released. For example, if 100,000 cubic feet per second comes to the dam, it may all be used for the turbines unless spill is required. If spill takes 50 kcfs, the turbines get only 50 kcfs. Flushing fish does not mean more water, it's just a different distribution of water. Nitrogen gas saturation caused by spill creates an environment that is potentially lethal for both smolts and returning adults. In the current spread the risk management program, in-river fish are subject to high nitrogen gas saturation and a 50% mortality rate. Years of spill have produced falling adult returns. If the past 12 years of spill had worked, we should have seen increased adult returns here. Instead, adult returns are down here, and ultimately, spill has not improved adult returns. Salmon returns are declining. This will exacerbate over the next 2 years. The current management of river flows to flush fish has damaged Snake River Chinook and steelhead populations. If we want returns of salmon, healthy returns, we must properly manage our river and fishery resource now. So, what does the research say? Patel, researching pit tag data, stated, we conclude that on a yearly average, it is better to transport both wild and hatchery spring and summer Chinook salmon collected at Lower Granite. Our results generally support transportation for steelhead, but there are too few tagged fish to establish whether a statistically significant difference exists. Now, the name of the report, as you can see, is here, but it is also listed in the references later on in this presentation. A NOAA fisheries report stated transported fish in the run at large return at a higher rate than migrants in the run at large. So transport is better than in the river. Again, the name of that report is here. Fish Passage Center was asked to evaluate this NOAA report. Now, Fish Passage Center, in my opinion, is a pro-breach organization. So they're going to offer a statement that, in my opinion, is quite convoluted. Smolts that were not bypassed return as adults at a greater rate than smolts that were bypassed. Now, to me, that's an ambiguous statement. You have to remember the smolts that were not bypassed were transported. Therefore, Fish Passage Center's statement agrees with the NOAA report that transported fish return at a higher rate than bypass fish, and Fish Passage Center's statement supports the Patel pit tag research. Survival rate for transported fish is greater than 98% from lower granite to the estuary. That's in a barge. For years and continuing today, smolts are pit tagged for this research study, as you see on the right, the Northwest Fisheries Science Center National Marine Fisheries Service. And in that report, when talking about summer Chinook from the 1999 smolt migration, states that the transported SARs were 0.18% for hatchery fish and 0.13% for wild fish, while SARs for the in-river fish were 0.12% for the hatchery and 0.03 for the wild fish. The report goes on to say transported SARs, and I believe this is talking about steelhead, were 0.46 for the wild fish, while the SARs for the in-river fish were 0.17 for the wild fish. Now, this NOAA report is shown here in the visual regarding those statistics. Transport on the left of wild spring-summer Chinook compared to in-river wild spring-summer Chinook on the right. So barge smolts compared to survival of in-river smolt SARs. Not just survival, these are returning to lower granite dam. Then steelhead, in the same report, this is a visual, 0.46% for the SARs of the barged smolts compared to 0.17 of the in-river fish. Graph 8 shows the positive impacts of transporting smolts. Graph 9, 10, 11, the top trend lines are the number of adult returns. The bottom trend lines are the numbers of smolts transported. So it's a busy graph. It's important though to recognize, number one, quarter order spill, we showed that earlier, 2005, June. Fortunately, 90% of the smolts reached lower granite before June 30th, and they were transported, a record number of 12 million. Over here we see the highest number of adult returns ever at lower granite was in 2009, 4 years later, with 500 and almost 63,000 returning Chinook and steelhead. Down below, you'll note that the smolts subjected to spill in 2006, 7, and 8 had declining adult returns in 2010, 11, and 12. And please note, 2001 returns of 500,000, that's before court order spill even began. We've had 18 years of spill and it has failed, resulting in poor numbers of returning adults. Declining transportation reduces Chinook returns. Now in this graph, you can see that the trend line for Chinook is fairly flat, but there is some continuity, some shadowing between the transport smolts and the Chinook returns. As transport, you can see the trend line declines. We're going to see declining Chinook returns. Now this is barged steelhead. Note that the lines are, although they cross, they're almost parallel. As barging declines, steelhead returns decline. When you add the Chinook and the steelhead together, you'll see that there are practically parallel lines between reduced barging and reduced number of returning adults 4 years later. Again, we're back to that in-river mortality rate down to Bonneville being at 50% when we have success with fish that are transported and return. These fish did not return to lower granite. These fish did. Spilling river flows to benefit fish has failed, having reduced adult returns. Barging is mitigation for dams, just as fish hatcheries are mitigation for dams. If the dams are removed, there's no financial support for the hatcheries. Like the hatcheries, barging improves adult returns. If we reduce spill and dissolved gas saturation while transporting as many smolts as possible, adult returns will increase. But can we change the current management? This is the graph that we showed earlier as the red line moved back 4 years. Excuse me. So what we're doing is showing the year that they were transported and the year that they returned. So with 5 million smolts barged in 18 resulted in 240 returns in 22. So then barging was reduced to 3 million smolts, and the result 4 years later was 204,000 adult returns. Then barging was reduced by 2/3 down to 1.1 million, and then again down to 366,000. So the question is, we know what the returns were in 2003. When you reduce barging, where are we headed? So on the left, this is the transport history of barging. We are reducing our barging. That linear line, that trend line shows barging continues to decline. On the right, the transport is blue, which shows the declining transport along with declining steelhead and chinook. Barging works when we use it. Increasing salmon returns will require a collaborative effort. Anglers, fishing guides, boating enthusiasts, and commercial transportation. Everyone using the river needs to work together. Multiple NOAA studies report that transported fish return at a higher rate than in river fish, than spilled fish. The data from the Fish Passage Center's comparative survival study aligns with the analysis from these several NOAA studies and with the Battelle analysis. This effort to save our salmon is science-driven. Adaptive management means learning from the past mistakes and adopting a new plan that enhances adult returns. Spill kills fish. Barging works. My name is Fred Mensick, and we have a list of the references here that you can look up on the internet. And these are 2 and then 4 graphs that come, charts that come from the Comparative Survival Study, 2020 Fish Passage Center Comparative Survival Study. And then these are tables from DART. Anybody can download this and check the graphs that have been presented today. I want to thank you so much for listening to this presentation.